Back on a Thursday night, everybody. Amidst this coronavirus pandemic, we're pausing to focus on some specific bills on the legislative agenda. And if you would like to call in, please do so. We just noted we haven't gotten any callers tonight. We think people are not even touching their phones right now. Social distancing. Or maybe watching other things, but that's all right. If you're watching and you're just enjoying this and maybe learning something, that's all that we're about tonight.
Works too.
That works. We're just about educating you and giving you at least one person's point of view. And we do appreciate Chris taking the time after a long day coming in. The Equality Project, just briefly to get away. How have you dealt with this coronavirus pandemic? And obviously you have people, you were talking about these captains all around the state, and obviously this has impacted how you lobby, how you work. Obviously, it's a lot of FaceTime now instead of face-to-face.
We had a pretty robust, what they call a digital program, meaning that we have a very aggressive online presence with Facebook and Twitter and a big email list. So we use that extensively, and there are a lot of things you can do now, like register voters and raise awareness of things and do petitions on bills. And we were already doing a lot of that, so it's not going to be an impossible shift for us. We did cancel all of our public events for the foreseeable future, including some days on the Hill when people would have come in. Today, I told all our regional chairs that they were not to have any events for the foreseeable future, and if people invited them to co-host an event, they were to let me know, and I'm going to read whoever invited them the riot act, because I don't want our folks getting sick. So we had to do a little shifting, but not as much as maybe some groups.
Everyone, and I can't stress this enough, I had a friend of mine text me and said, can you just remind people to be all in. There's a sense that there's a small group of just very selfish people who just say, to heck with everything, I'm going to live my life and go out and do everything. And we got to follow the CDC guidelines here, and we're learning a lot from this. And on the back end, hopefully, we can look back and say, okay, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? I just saw a report tonight that South Korea really is the model, the way they handle. I mean, they jumped to it, and at first people thought, wow, they're being really strict, but they put a clamp on it really fast, and opposed to Italy, where they're just suffering right now. So
one thing about this crisis, a lot of people work in the service industry. I would say an incredibly high proportion to the general population are members of the LGBTQ community, because I'm seeing it all over my Facebook feed. And a lot are involved in the restaurant and hospitality industry. I mean, the general public is too. So I'm not trying to stereotype. I'm just saying, as a percentage, we're highly represented in those fields. And I am very concerned about their economic well-being. First comes health, and we all understand that. But that does not mean that it's going to be easy for a lot of folks to make a living. So I've urged our regional chairs in their individual Facebook groups to share as much information about who is hiring in this crisis, how people can get aid, because I think a lot of members of our community around the state in conservative areas aren't sure where to go or can't always trust institutions. And maybe a lot of people are there. So that's one way we're responding to the crisis.
I had a friend just text me, she lost both her jobs in the past week. She was serving and bartending, and she was driving for Lyft or Uber, and both are gone. Poof, just like that. One thing that we can all do, and still practice social distancing, is support those local businesses. Restaurants may be closing their dining rooms, but their kitchens are still open, and they are cooking, and you can order delivery and still be safe and support these businesses. So anyway, moving on. Just talking about in general what you said about trying to change hearts in the legislature. Here we are in 2020, and although, as you said, it seems like more of these bills are popping up, we have more conservatives in state government here in Tennessee. At the same time, we have more people who are out.
That's right.
So all of a sudden, like you said, you have cousins and friends, and I have family members and friends, and so many people. It's kind of accustomed to it now. My children, who are teenagers, don't even think they don't even think twice. They just know some of their friends are gay or lesbian, or this person may be transgender, whatever it is.
Yep.
How do you use that then, like you said, to change hearts and minds, to show people, hey, this is not the boogeyman way over in the corner. This is people out, friends and neighbors.
It's not a threat. These are your friends and neighbors. But if you thought it was the boogeyman, shouldn't you learn as much as possible? Right. Shouldn't you? And I think one great source is learning from parents. And parents are, there's a group called Mama Bears. That's what they're called, and they're.
Is this the Clarksville group?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a name that is used all over the country. But the ones in Clarksville are definitely Mama Bears. There's no doubt about it. And not only are they fierce defenders of their children, but they're also great ambassadors and bringers of the message, and they can really tell. They know the medical information, but they also know they can describe incredibly well what it's like to go through the process when your child transitions, and what that means, and how there is still all this love, and it's still your child, and it's so hard to argue against a mother who's there to defend her child. Or any parent. I mean, we encourage the dads to do the same thing. But the moms groups have coalesced more quickly around the country.
Getting back to the bills, once they are filed, how do you track them? Is this your lobbyist's job, or someone? How do you know right away? Do you get the phone call and say this bill was just because they're coming in? There's bills on everything. So how do you spot that one? Here's one that we need to watch.
Yeah, she and I are both reading all the bills.
All of them.
Yeah, because she's really good. But even so, it almost takes 2 or 3 of us to catch as much as we can, because we're looking for different things, and she will catch things that I would never have thought of. And I'm reading a lot of the LGBTQ national media, so I'm looking for certain things.
Right.
And between us, we pretty much are able to get them all. Other people are volunteers, and just various people are reading them too, and that helps.
And what happens with maybe something that's added in an amendment later on, which can happen, right? I mean, just as an example, this coronavirus bill in Washington, some people voted against it, including Marsha Blackburn. She's a conservative, fiscal conservative, obviously. The people who voted against her, and some of the critics are saying you should see all the pork that was added, or amendments that were added at the last minute. So this can happen. Right. Stuff can get in and still get passed.
And that's why having a good lobbyist means the world for a group like ours, who is so behind the 8 ball. She has such great relationships up there that she is going to hear what's coming. And we know what to look for. And there are rules too about filing amendments. They have to be filed at a certain time. So we know when and where to look, but it's her relationships and her experience that we rely on there.
Talk a little bit about the economic impact that you're concerned about, and the argument that you use if one or all of these are passed.
An argument that we in the Nashville LGBT Chamber and others use is the example of North Carolina. If you pass a really, really bad discriminatory bill that totally stigmatizes a group of people like transgender people, there is economic fallout. And Forbes, which is no liberal rag by any stretch of the means, estimated the North Carolina fallout over its bathroom bill to be $630 million.
630 million.
630 million, which is big in any circumstance, but let's look at it in light of current circumstances. Right now, the tornado and COVID-19 are having a massive impact on our tourism industry. So let's say we recover or begin to recover by June or July. the legislature is in session in June again and passes one of these bills, just as we're starting to make a recovery. And then there's a target on Tennessee, and our recovery is not as fast as it could have been, or not as deep as it could have been, because we're getting all these boycotts, conventions deciding not to come here, artists not wanting to perform here, on and on and on. This is not a risk we need to take. Morally, it's not something we should be doing anyway. But this is a sign, an added sign, that it would be a bad idea, because we're already going through too much as a state right now.
I mean, $630 million. What ultimately happened in North Carolina?
There were some amendments to the law, and there was a phase out of part of the bill related to what local governments can do with their non-discrimination ordinances. I don't think it's been fully repealed. But there is at least a partial repeal of the bill.
I want to go to line one and welcome a friend of ours, Reverend Fuzz. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing good. I had a quick question.
Yeah.
I think, people, when we talk about the LGBT community, lots of the people, the question they always ask or object to, and I'm just trying to learn, is why is it that why are they public? Why do they have these parades? And they feel like that the LGBT community attempts to force their ideas on the larger public. Now, that's what people say.
Sure.
I ask, why do you work inside of, like you have a LGBT Chamber of Commerce and separate organizations? I'm not against that, but I'm saying, but do you work inside of the regular system, the so-called mainstream system? Why do people have to know about your sexual orientation? Right. And just what are your feelings about that, so we can learn?
It's a great question. Pride, the reason we use the word pride and the reason there are parades is because pride is not seen in the sense of being puffed up, as the Bible talked about, but as being the opposite of shame. Because shame is what has been put on our community by others. So to dispel shame, one has to develop that internal sense of pride and openness and honesty about who one is. So that's a big part of the internal dynamic, and that's why coming out is such a big moment for members of the LGBTQ community, or series of moments. For some, it's a lifetime process. So that's a piece of it. In terms of separate organizations, great question too, because we get attacked in specific ways. Legislators use certain parts of the law code to attack us. They might use part of the adoption code, or the marriage code, or the high school athletics code, or, the code that governs the way libraries are set up in this state. And because there are bills that attack us specifically, we need organizations and institutions that can defend us specifically, because we understand precisely what is happening from the moment that it is happening. Now, that said, we absolutely rely on allies, work with allies, and are constantly reaching out, building new relationships. A lot of mainstream companies support our work in the legislature. One example of an ally is certainly Taylor Swift, who last year gave our organization and our community a huge boost during the legislative session by supporting us. Mike Curb is another who's, a straight ally and a very good ally in this city. So, yes, there's the specificity of our separate organizations, but we work in coalition and relationship with a lot of great allies. So, wonderful question, Reverend Fuzz, and I'm glad you asked.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Reverend Fuzz. How we doing on break time, Taylor? We're good. Okay. I want to ask about this marriage bill, which I thought was settled, but okay, this is HB 2410, HB 2310. You're saying please vote no. Both bills have high fiscal notes. Tell me a little bit about what this is about, this bill.
There are some people who continue to try to relitigate
the Supreme Court
decision of 2015. And they are trying to come up with new ways of attacking that court decision and saying it's really a states' rights issue. States have the ability to set marriage policy. So they are trying to look at new angles on it. I don't think they'll get very far, but I think part of the goal, the long-term plan, is to pass a bill in some legislature and for it to get overturned by the district court and then to appeal it to the circuit, U.S. Circuit Court.
Whichever circuit court that might be, yeah.
And to do the same thing in another circuit and there to be a clash of circuits and eventually get it back to the U.S. Supreme Court under a more conservative court, obviously.
Yeah.
And our courts are turning more conservative. So
do we know, I mean, obviously during the vetting process, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, whether they would actually, we just don't know.
We don't know. You know, both are conservatives, but both have, in a few instances, shown some progressive streak on some issues. Gorsuch, for example, on Native American affairs, has shown a lot of deference to respect for the tribes and their rights. So we don't fully know what would happen. And that's what's scary about it. I think in the near term, these kinds of bills would be struck down, but I don't think they're going to pass this session. And part of the reason is they have high fiscal notes. If you undo marriage policy and exclude people from marriage that the federal government's programs require you to accept, then you risk losing federal funds.
Right.
And we're not in a position to do that right now.
And just the litigation, and again, economic impact,
right,
and so on and so forth.
Sure.
There would be a lot of reaction to that.
Yeah, and it would draw, if you undid marriage equality in Tennessee, it would bring on the same recriminations related to tourism and bookings and things like that. So we would get a massive boycott.
Going to take another break and be back right after this.